Okay, in the last video we left off just talking about merging now that we have a compare method. And so just to show you some code on this, here's our compare to method again for the student. It bases it off of the GPA, like which GPA is greater. And so what I have is I made an array of student objects. This is a regular array. And I added three students, Billy, Gunnar, Mitchell, just like is shown earlier, right? And they're in order by GPA there. And then I'm going to merge that with a second student list. So there's list one, and then I'm doing list two with Farwell and Max in it, and I'm just populating with those two. And then I'm going to call merge list method, which we'll look at in a little bit. All right, and then it's just going to print out the results, right? And as we'll see, it should, based on how we define compare to, it should put them in order by their GPA. All right. And so certainly from this point, we could say, well, maybe we want to put them in alphabetical order, right? Because they're not in alphabetical now. So you can merge them based on alphabets. So we don't actually have to change the merge method, right? Because all the merge does is compare the two and take the lesser of the two. So all we need to really do is change students compare to method. All right. So basically, I'm going to comment this one out. I'm going to get rid of it. So I'm going to do source, toggle comment, turn it off. And then I have my other one here, which I wrote earlier. Okay, so I'm going to uncomment that one out. And it is, again, a compare to, but now it bases off the name, right? So the previous one was going off GPAs, and now I'm just changing it so it compares their names, right? And I'm just going to, basically those are strings. So I'm going to do the regular string compare to method. And if that's less than 0, then return -1. I could have just done return this dot compare to other name, but I wanted to return either -1, 0, or 1. So I just wrote my little if statement there. If they're equal, return 0. And if the 1 is greater, return 1. Okay, so that is all I changed. And if I go back to student runner, where before it merged them and put them in order by GPA, nothing changes here. I just hit go, and magically now they are in alphabetical order instead of GPA order, right? So that's how the sorting kind of is related to this idea of the compare to method. All right, so one of the things they're going to have you do in homework is one of the coding bats. It's kind of like this, but basically you're going to write an advanced compare to that kind of has two parts. Like this student had both a name and a GPA, and I did two separate compare tos. My original one was by GPA, and then my second one was by their string name. The homework's going to have you do both. They're going to say, okay, sort it by, I forget which one they say first, but say sort it by name first. And then if they have a matching name, then sort it by their GPA if their names match. So you'll have to have like nested ifs, like ifs inside of ifs, to kind of do both, right? So it's kind of a more advanced compared to, but it's something that could show up on the AP test. So that's the first coding bat question. And then the second coding back question is about merging, which is part of this code and this idea. All right, so I'm just going to show you a little bit of the merge code I have here, in hopes that it helps you with the other coding back question and a good review of merging. Okay, so it's back here in my runner, and you don't have to do anything with this. You're just going to do coding back questions, but we're making the two lists of students, right? And then I'm calling them together with merge. And so basically the idea of it is I'll kind of walk you through, I guess, the different parts. So the first thing is we're going to return a list of students that's these two merged together. So here's our two inputs, and then it's going to return one that's merged. And so this one needs to have enough space for one for each of the students that are in both list one and list two. So visually, I go back here. Here I had 5 total students, right? And so I needed to make 5 spots. And so I just add the length of this one plus the length of the other one, right? So that's what's going on in this code right here. Okay, and then the other part that's super tricky on this is you have to keep track of the indexes specifically. So there's one for the combined array, which spot we're inserting into, and then one for each of the list one and list two. So visually looking at that again is I have an IDX here that moves over, right? So each time um, I move over, like I insert, if I was doing these by names, I think Billy would go first. So I'd put Billy here first and then move this IDX over, right? So we have to have an IDX that tracks each one of the lists, like where we are in the list, which ones we're comparing and inserting. But then we also have an IDX for where we need to put it in the combined list. So I added this combined IDX because once I put Billy here, now I want to move this over and say this is the next spot we're going to insert in, right? So whenever you insert, at this point for doing GPAs now, no, names, you're doing names, sorry. I would do Farwell next because Gunner compared to Farwell. And so when I put Farwell down here, I need to say, okay, I need to move this IDX up one, so plus plus IDX2, but then also move this one up because this is where the next one is going to get inserted in. So you're kind of manually tracking the indexes, and there's three of them, one for each list up here, and then one for the combined IDX. Okay, so back in our code, we're just basically going to loop while both of them still have elements. All right, so the idea is once you get to the end of one of them, you can end. So in this case, let's see. So what would come next? So we'd have Max or Gunner compared to Max, and Gunner would be, we're going by names again, would be inserted. We do this, and then Mitchell compared to Max would be Max would be next. So we move this over, and then once this one is exhausted, then we're just going to spin through and whatever is left over here, slam it in. Right, so you'll see this at the very end of the code is whatever's left, you just put it in. So our loop just says, well, both of them still have elements. So IDX1 is less than this, and IDX2 is less than this. So they still have elements. All right, indexes all start at 0. And again, we're spinning while either one have a value in it. And so what I do basically is just get the student 1 and student 2. So get them and then compare them. So here's where the compareTo method matters, right? I'm going to compare them. And if compareTo returns a negative number, that means student 1 is less, and so it's going to be added. Right, so I add it to the combined at whatever spot the index is pointing to. Right? That's why that little thing matters, points. And then I got to move those two over. So I got to move over IDX1 and move over the index of where I'm placing them, right? Which I showed visually earlier where, we need to keep track of which is the next spot we're going to put the thing in. So that's why we move it over each time we place one, we move it over one and move over the IDX from the list that we placed from. Okay, and then the other choice is if the other one, if that if part fails, then the other one must be the one that is less than or equal to. So we add it, student 2, and then just increase its index and the combined index spot because we need to move over the next spot we're placing it. Okay, and then the part that I think is kind of confusing is that's one while loop that runs while both of them still have elements, but then one of the lists will still have extra elements at the end. So that's what these loops at the end do is just say if there's any elements left in list 1, in other words, if IDX1 is less than the length, there's still elements in there. We add from list 1 and increase the combined index and index 1 from list 1. And then if there's any left in list 2, we do the same thing. Okay, and then when we're finally done, we return all of that. Right, so one of the coding bats has a merge thing, which is somewhat similar to this. Some ways it's easier, some ways it's harder, but it's good practice with that merge idea, and that's where this compareTo method changes how they get sorted. Hope it all makes sense. Fire away if you have questions.